It's 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. I will call the special meeting of Fundy Albert Council for December 27th, 2024 to order. The first order of business is the adoption of the agenda. The agenda for this special meeting of council for December 27th, 2024 was circulated in advance. I would accept a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. So moved by Councillor Elderton, seconded by Councillor Jonah. Any discussion on the motion? Not. All in favor, signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's adopted unanimously. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare in relation to the agenda? There being none, we'll move on to item number 4, which is budget deliberations. So on December 23rd, I was asked what my expectations were in relation to today's meeting. I responded indicating that it was to adopt the draft budgets as recommended by administration, and that a failure to do so would result in the province following through on its commitment to approve the budget numbers that are in the budget portal as entered by our treasurer. We've all come to the table today with different positions about what our expectations are. I'd like to know what your expectations are, as it will help administration understand how close or how far we are from answering this important question. As well, knowing where you are is important to understand what needs to happen to get us there, if that's possible. So I will go around the table and ask each of you for your comments or position in relation to what your expectations are. So I'll start with Councillor Elderton.
Well, for me, I think we're getting there. The utility and revenue expenses, I would like a little more detail today on those, because I think this is the first time we're kind of seeing those, and I think there's some increases there that need to be explained. As far as the budget itself, I would like to see some tax rates remain the same. I don't know how we get there. That's where I'm sitting at.
Thank you. Councillor Ward Russell.
Good morning. I guess, to maybe continue on Councillor Hogan's comments is that I think we were quite clear starting in September, the tax rates, we wanted to see them stay somewhat the same. So I would concur that I am not in favor of seeing tax rates increase at all. Also with that, I see that all of a sudden now under the summary tab, we're now down to 2 tax rates, one for the villages and one for the formal SDs. I don't believe that we actually had that discussion to see that happen. So I'd like to see it go back to where we had it even for last year, or even, there's been multiple budgets that we received that show different levels within each. So I'd like to see that continue as well.
Thank you. Councillor Jonah.
As the other two, would like to see tax rates remain very, very close to the same, if not exactly the same. I'm really having struggles to understand why the former village of Hillsborough went into amalgamation with the lowest tax rates, and now we are going to be the highest. And I can't accept that. I won't accept that. So I'm looking forward to some conversations today.
Thank you. Councillor Lyon.
My thoughts are, I told you last meeting, I'd had my thoughts put together for this morning, and I do. I don't want no increase in none of the tax rates. I want them to stay the same. I think the wage should be at the 2.38, where we discussed it unanimously around the table. And the reason being is we've got an unaudited budget, financials out there that we have no idea what's in them. And we're going to try to make decisions on where we're going and how we're going to spend money. So for that reason, I think we need to get our financials in shape, find out where we sit completely with all our money, and stick with this tax rate from last year to this year, make it work for the year. And come September, sit down and have some strong budget deliberations and get our feet back under us and get things lined up so we know where we are.
Thank you. Councillor Coates.
I feel that the former LSDs are taking a hit on taxes and not getting a lot of service for them. I realize we've got to help out the villages. Their expenditures, but getting a lot of feedback from people that saying, we're still not getting anything for 2 years into this. And we had garbage before, we at least had fire. Now, I explained to them in 2023, I believe, that we had it on that there was an increase in their taxes to pay for part of the recreation. If I'm not too far out, but I really can't vote for an increase in tax rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Errol.
So for today, what I'm looking for is there's, new, as I think it was Councillor Elder said, that we've got new information on the utility revenue, expenses, and rates that we've never had a discussion on. I think it's important we have a discussion on that today. I'm seeing rates, especially for Hillsborough, that I think is counterproductive for our communities, and so I think we need to have a discussion on that. I would like an explanation, better explanation, to help me understand the transfers that are happening between the funds, so between utility and general operating. And also I see some transfers from reserves that I don't understand. So that will help me gauge better of where we're going here. I see the effect of the golf club road financing seems to be quite dramatic, and it's in its effects on the 2025 general operating budget. And I'm trying to understand how that is skewing our budget deliberations, even though at least I was under the impression that if this was to go ahead, in all likelihood, we're not actually on the hook for any of this, or minor at least. And yet it's having quite an impact in the rates and hence our discussions. I tend to agree with my fellow councillors that I think politically, keeping the rates quite similar, if not the same as last year, is probably the wisest thing to do at this point as we continue to stabilize the amalgamated municipality and its work and its finances. And I think that by doing that, if we kept the rates the same, it's implying that the budget itself, the expenditure side, is close to a 12.4% increase compared to last year. That would be the cost assessment with any adjustments on the fact that our equalization grant and revenues are slightly different than last year. And I think that this is probably more palatable for us at this point. A 12.4 or so % increase over last year, as opposed to what's currently proposed in the December 23rd proposal, which is beyond that even by about $100,000. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. I hope we can get to a consensus position where we're in a position to approve the budget. If we're not, I understand that the province may intervene in this business about what's in the portal, and that the province would approve that. I think we would need to be wise to have a discussion with the province. We don't have the audited financial result. I'm not sure we're all in agreement on what's in the portal. So I think we should just work and try and come to a consensus here. And if we can't, we should have another discussion of what's next concerning concerning the province.
Before I say anything, I'm going to ask our CAO to comment and then our treasurer.
I don't really have a lot of comments. It is up to council to instruct the administration on what you would like to see. So if that's what you would like to see, then there are repercussions that come with that. I mean, aging infrastructure is one of them. But it just means that we'll have to sharpen our pencils on our side and come back with a work plan for 2025 and hope for no emergencies of things that need funds. But once we get the information from the budget, we can then see if we can get money elsewhere, if there are grants available, is there. So like I said, we can sharpen pencils on our side. I would leave it up to the treasurer to discuss the difference in the increases and, keeping the tax rates the same when all of our costs are going up. I'm not sure how realistic that part of it is, because we do know that things like garbage and policing and those have increased. So could we still do that on last year's budget? Well, at what price would probably be for some of those projects that maybe won't get done this year. But whatever council decides on is what the administration will go with.
Thank you. Our treasurer, do you have any comments?
The utility budget, I've actually trimmed some from the original draft that was sent out in October, Linda. I'm trying to get the tax rates down, but we had to keep some items in there, especially our lift stations are really in disrepair. We have there's two in Alma, and they're only running on one pump right now because of not being maintained correctly. So it's something we can't cut back. If you do, we can go and we can cut it, but then we have no money to maintain them like we did this year to try to bring them up to code. So there is infrastructure and water that if you take those amounts out, that's going to take out our maintenance, which hasn't been done correctly. Obviously, we're having such issues with it.
Just in terms of the general operating budget.
In the general operating budget, from the original one that we had shown to council, we cut probably say $300,000 or $400,000 out, and we're about around 800,000 over what we budgeted last year. A lot of that's contributed from things that are out of our control, like fire, police, garbage collection, and I have gone back and taken out the principal payment for the culvert project, where it's not going to take place till June. So by the time we go for a debenture for it, we won't be making a principal payment for the year of 2024. But we still have to keep interest there, and so I took a jump out of there. Linda's had recent training and part of that was for local government, and RDC has told us they have, fair amount of money for different projects. So we've taken out the extra that was there for zero in hopes that RDC will help us fund the rest of the project to complete it, to try to find funds, because what I've learned this year more than last year is that every time we take something out that's 5-digit number or more, that's where you actually see a number change in your tax rate. If you take something like $1,000, it may make a change of 0.0001. So taking little stuff out does not make a big difference when it comes to changing the tax rate. We have to take big chunks, 10,000.
Thank you. So if I read the room correctly, there is zero appetite for an increase in the tax rates. So rather than be wasting our time going through line by line and looking for items that we can trim, if the general consensus is we leave the tax rates at what they were, then we instruct our treasurer and CAO to go back, balance this thing so that the tax rates equal what they were last year. And then, as our CAO pointed out, there are implications for that. But if that's council's direction, then that is what needs to happen. And so we're nowhere near, based on how I listened to each one of you, we're nowhere near where we need to be for those tax rates to be the same as they were last year. So if that's what council wants, then that's what we'll direct treasurer and CAO to do. Yes, Councillor Elder.
One question, because I went back to look at how we did it last year, and I'm still in some confusion because I think and I'm just gonna use Riverside and Albert for an example, had a bit of a surplus there last year. And it was spread equally, from what I can tell, across the board. It was adjusted to share my extra to keep the tax rates down.
I think the way we did it last year is that, you guys didn't want tax rates decreasing,
Right.
so we added them in, but we also had LSDs that were blocked at 5 cents. So that amount, everything over that 5 cents that they would have had to pay in their tax rate was taken on by the former villages. So a good chunk of that is that portion that the LSDs were not paying.
Correct. So, but I guess my point is the former villages covered what we needed to cover to keep the tax rates to where they should be. So when I see Alma, for instance, taking a huge decrease, why is that not being shared amongst everybody to keep everybody the same?
That's why I made the changes that I did. So, I mean, there was a great test to how I estimated tax rates for last. So I went back to the drawing board and I looked at what I call like the village centers in the former LSE areas. And the majority of their services were, I think they were all the same. So anything that was the same, I kept under separate, and then I created a proposed tax, you may want to call it a levy, for items that aren't shared completely.
Right, and that's what,
Yeah, and with that, I was able to lower tax rates, because that goes with what amalgamation, was leading towards. It's not just the fact of 2 tax rates, but these smaller municipalities and LSEs no longer afford really to be on their own. That's why we amalgamated together. So we have the financial stability to do that.
so in this proposal, if I remember correctly, is not the former village of Alma still getting a bit of a tax break?
They are, but they were paying a fair amount of taxes for only having the same services as everybody else. The budget is created with them having the same service as everyone else, contributing the same.
Correct me if I'm wrong, council wants the rates the same as what they were last year. It means Alma's rate would be the same as what it was last year, Hillsborough's would, Riverside Albert's would be, and the LSDs would be as well. Keeping in mind that last year, the villages subsidized the tax rates in the former LSDs. And so that's what council wants to continue. Because that's what you're saying, is you want the rates the same. That means no increase for the former LSDs and no increase for the former villages. Like, we all need to be on the same page on this.
Absolutely.
Okay, so do I understand that correctly? Because like, what I don't want to do is get into a protracted discussion about tax rates and balancing. They are the ones that can come back and say, here's the impact on what you want. And then we can have another meeting on Monday. And then this is the impact and this is what the result will be as far as the budget is concerned. But that won't tell us what the impact will be on work plans. That will come at a later date, correct?
Correct.
What I would rather do is, if that's council's direction, what I would rather do is have the conversation around, and we mentioned that there hasn't been a fulsome discussion on blending the tax rates and also going through the utility budgets. Let's better use our time to do that than be trying to have a continued conversation around the general operating budget and blending and increasing or decreasing the costs. Because as the treasurer mentioned, they got to come up with some pretty significant cost reductions in the proposed budget for that all to balance to where we were last year. Yes, Deputy.
Well, I think that's partly really what I was saying in my comments, is that I think there's some information that we need to receive now and discuss among ourselves to better understand the implications of maintaining the tax rates as they were last year by my ciphering, I believe that if you maintain the tax rates as last year, there's in the order, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, in the order of $100,000 further reduction in our expenditures here. So going from 6,758,000 down by another 100, I think will get you there. But I would like to understand a few things. So if I may ask the treasurer there, because you just mentioned about the golf club road, that so between this is a question, between the December 19 spreadsheet that you gave us and the December 23rd spreadsheet, is there then, we're reducing on the fiscal services for payment of debt charges, principal and interest? Are the numbers going down because we're not now accounting for?
So it makes a difference. So like when you take out the debenture the first of the year, there's a good chance you're gonna make a principal payment. But if you don't take that debenture until about halfway through the year, you may just make an investment.
And so the December 23rd includes this adjustment already. So it's still, I'm still seeing a third. So I still don't really understand, why does the budget need to include these financing charges when they're not really real? Hmm?
But the municipal capital board, we have funds to cover this project, and if we're not showing in our budget to pay for them, that's something to take away our approval.
So it isn't really real. Like, I understand then if you need to have it in the budget.
It needs to be in the budget. The likelihood that it will happen is probably not there.
But even if it did happen, my understanding is from previous discussions from yourself, Mayor, that this essentially would be covered by another program. So we would have raised the taxes from our people with the political costs associated with it, but it's not really real that we're essentially give the money back to the people through a
This
transfer.
has been a topic conversation before. The treasurer explained all this, that if we don't have to spend, we'll be able to reinvest in other infrastructure projects, or it would be declared as a surplus at the end of 2025. All that information was provided by our treasurer before. But as she mentions, it has to be accounted for in our budget. It could turn out to be a paper exercise.
But can we do this through transfers? Because we know later in the meeting here, we're going to have a resolution, a rerun of a resolution that we were first entertained at our last special meeting. Because the money is in a way fictitious, and we do have reserves, can we not have this amount of money that we need to show to the province we have? Can we not just bring it in from a reserve as opposed to putting it on our taxpayers?
Roads is capital, is it not?
Yes, it would just muddy my waters. I'd have to look back on it. But there could be a way of putting in an operating reserve. I would have to double check what our
Sorry, go ahead.
amounts are.
But if I recall, that was a conversation when we were going to do the project, that council wasn't comfortable in using those reserves in case the money didn't come back from the province on it, that then we would now use that money. So is that not in principle the same thing? So we didn't want to use the reserves in order to fund the project in the interim. So we were applying for the loan.
Right, but what maybe we didn't, I
So
didn't
it
appreciate.
just takes away other projects that were set for next year. The big ditching project in Alma off the table.
Well, it's only
Yeah,
off the
maybe
table
we'll try.
during this theoretical line when we haven't been reimbursed. Because what we're doing right now as the proposal that either we have before us, or if we go back to the drawing board, we're still having to raise tens of thousands of dollars through the warrant for which we're not really using.
So like originally when I made the budget, I took it out of what we had set, Ian had set for paving. Because one of the biggest complaints we've had from residents through the year and through the survey was infrastructure. So roads, potholes, he put enough money so we could fix potholes in those areas. We could do grading twice a year with gravel to fill in those extra potholes in those roads. And to do more padding. But we took that out to cover for this. But if you want to cut back on the requests of the residents to better their infrastructure, that's a decision of council.
But I thought that the road infrastructure amounts, including paving, which of course, that was a sore point for two of the villages this year because that money got redirected into the Pound Hill. But I thought that those numbers have never been reduced during the 4 iterations of this budget. At no time do I recall that we were knocking down.
It was before we even took it to council, because I said we can't have it that high when we have to pay for the golf club road. So we'll move that before we even showed it to council. Me and Ian, when we first had our administrators meetings, we decided we're gonna cut that out of the paving budget. So if that project is funded, we still have that money to complete those paving projects. But this is gonna it will change what we have for paving projects.
These are recommendations. It's council's prerogative to
If
change.
you want to change it, you can
No, I
change it.
still don't actually understand this.
Just, I don't interrupt, please.
I don't understand how our paving has anything to do with principal and interest for a project on Golf Club Road that we hope to be 100% covered. They seem to be completely separate.
And I understand your concern, Deputy Mayor, but at the end of the day, if that has to be accounted for so that the province sees that we've got it included in our budget, then I would recommend leaving it there. If we don't, and the province sees that, they could say, you're not approved for your financing.
Right. So I get that part. So what I'm saying is there a way, because it seems to me not really real money needs. Is there a way that we can find this money to show to the province that we're committing to it, to at least show a commitment, even though we hope to never spend it, that we bring that in from some other of our various sources that we have in bank accounts and GICs and funds, as opposed to putting it on the back of the taxpayer through the warrant?
Well, it's interest, so it would have to be.
Just hold on. His question is it possible to take it out of reserves?
Well, that's
I
what I'm
would
trying to
think-
answer.
Yes,
Well, I'm listening.
correct? Is it possible?
Well, it is possible, but we would have to go back to the table and look and see if I can put more money in operating reserve, because it would have to come out of an operating reserve. Because it's an expense, it's not a capital expense when it's interest.
It has to be in the proper bucket.
Which again, it's sort of fictitious money in anyways, right? We hoped.
So we're kind of going around in circles now. The answer to your question, I believe, is yes, but they would have to go back and figure out how to do it.
But does anybody see any merit in trying to do this so that it doesn't appear to our taxpayers? Isn't one of the reasons we're trying to not increase our tax rates is the political message that it sends to our people, constituents?
Jillian, just
Just wait. Councilor, Deputy Mayor Arrow, finish your thoughts.
So if that's one of the reasons, it seems counterproductive for us to be going down an avenue when there's another avenue available to us that wouldn't require us to increase a tax rate to pay for fictitious money that we probably won't even spend. If we can do it a different way, you don't have to raise the taxes from the people.
Part of that money, John, Councilor Arrow, is to cover interest that we're going to receive from the bank, because we don't have that $1.2 million in our bank account. We have to pay for that project upfront before we get reimbursement from them. And they said it could be a couple months before we get the money back. That is why I went back for interim financing. So we have no money in the account to pay, essentially in the budget to pay for those expenses. We can't do the project.
But is
Even
that,
if
but
part of it is for interest on a debenture.
Deputy Mayor Earl's question is, in order to pay that financing charge, could you not draw it out of reserve?
Out of an operating reserve.
Operating reserve, which, do we have an operating reserve right now?
For the operating reserve we have now has funds that are shared and it cannot be used for that.
That answers our question, I guess.
Maybe, and then is this one? I know this, it's a big day we have before us. This, the resolution that's coming later in the agenda, because it's a kind of a repeat of, almost repeat of what we were talked about the other day. Does that include the second number of the 172? Is that not the kind of reserve that we're needing?
The 2022 goes for reserve.
No,
Is it not?
it's not that one.
That's for capital projects within the former villages, so that one would be I think 73,000 would be for the Alma culvert project.
Yeah.
Another portion was, we had recommended for a down payment on the truck. And another portion was for a recommendation for putting a garage.
Couldn't this be, isn't this the perfect? Use that money because you're not really using it. You're using it to show to someone else, a funding agency, that we have a commitment and we do have the money to pay for the interest, the short term. Am I missing something?
No, I think I understand where you're coming from. So what Deputy Mayor Earl was suggesting is that you're suggesting that if we were to use that, then we wouldn't have funding for the projects. But if it's paid for by the Disaster Financial Assistance Program, that funding would be there for us to use.
You know, so call it in another year.
But not even.
Maybe not even.
Yeah. Sorry. Councilor Ward Russell wanted to speak.
And I appreciate your comments, John, and I think you're hitting on something here, but I'm also confused because if this project was scheduled to be completed in 24, which is what our goal was.
Mhm.
And it was not in the budget in 2024. How is that different? Why are we needing it in a budget now if we were gonna go ahead with the project in 24?
Because we would have gotten the borrowing authority and the borrowing authority didn't happen. But the likelihood that we would have incurred any expenses prior to the end of 2024 wouldn't have happened. It would have been in
So
2025.
obviously, we're in the same situation because June, time you get your well permits and get your tender, I mean,
You
you are,
won't permit center.
okay, so I mean, but there's a lot of boxes that need to be checked. So in order to start this on June 1st of 2025.
Not many.
You know, I'm just confused of why it didn't, we didn't have it in the budget in 2024, why it has to go through an input, impact the budget in 2025. I do agree that there is an operating reserve that it should probably be used from for.
So if the answer is no, it's not possible, then the answer is no, it's not possible. If the answer is yes, it's possible, then I'm sensing that that might be a strategy.
There's maybe some more input.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to, I believe what our treasurer is saying is that that exercise would then have a little bit of a pocket of money that we can use for other projects that may need to get done, like the road work and things that need to get accomplished. So it is raising the tax rate a little bit to get that little pocket of money. And if we're not using it we're using it in the interim for that project, but then when that money gets released from that, then we now have a little bit of cash that we can use for infrastructure. So that would take away from having that little bit of a, we're supposed to be saving 10%, I think, on every budget to try to put into an infrastructure pot so that when things come up, we're not constantly going for financing and that we're able to fix things as they come along. Why this wasn't in the budget for 2024 is because the Golf Club Road didn't collapse in 2023. So we didn't know about it until it happened, right? So we're always playing catch up on things, and starting to get a little bit proactive is, I think, what this suggestion is for, saying that we can can do this financing, use the money for that. And then once that money gets released, when we get the money back from the province, then we have a little bit of a start on a pot of money that we can use for upgrades when we need them.
Okay, so we've kind of flogged that one right to death. So what other points, like, do you still want to keep talking about the 2024 general operating budget, or is the instruction from council to go back and make it balanced to where the rates were? Keeping in mind that the cost of policing went up. Everything has gone up. So if the rates stay the same, I would agree that would generate some additional revenue based on the increase in assessments. So that will generate some additional revenue, but there would be likely some impacts operationally. At some point, I want us to make a decision in terms of whether we keep talking about this. So I'll sit here all day and keep talking about it, but we may not get to where we need to be. Yes, sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just have two more questions on elements in the December 23rd that I'm trying to understand, that I think are important. I don't think we've talked about them before. So if you went, Linda, to revenue there tab. Yes, there's a number here. It's the 68,573 number, which is what it is. It's a transfer from an operating reserve fund. You see that there? It's on
The line item, do you have?
yeah, it's the line. It's, you're actually showing it there.
Oh.
19121. And it's the 68 number, right down there. What is that number?
So the 68 increased from 50,000, based on workstation saying that I entered accounts I had spoken with, their WorkSafe refund was about same as what they paid for the year. So I took what we paid for the year and put it in there, but we actually made more. That's one of today's motions, is to put that money in the operating reserve so we can use it next year for training and for safety gear that our staff need.
Sure. What I thought I was looking at on this, first off, this whole tab is revenue, which is money coming into our general operating fund.
It's a refund of WorkSafe. If we don't have any WorkSafe expenses, I'm assuming that there would be a refund.
They gave us the refund last week. So they have a surplus in their coffers and they paid it back to the ones who paid in. Over a certain percentage, over a certain, I believe it was the last 5 years, maybe. We really looked over it. But this is money I received, I picked up last week and I've added in. So this will help pay for the training, safety training, and this will also pay for safety things that our staff need, like a trench box or different little things that WorkSafe wrote us up for that need fixed.
But why does it mention operating reserve? Why is it a transfer from an operating reserve? I'm missing something here.
Because we're putting money into an operating reserve that we have and we're using it in this budget.
By motion today.
Okay.
So we can use it next year. Because if we put it in if it goes in our, if it gets into our financials this year, we don't put it into an operating reserve, it becomes
Yeah, so this,
part of our budget.
if I understand correctly, the WorkSafe money reserve, maybe later today,
Yes.
and this is taking it from there
Yeah.
and bringing it into the general operating for 2025. Okay,
Yes. Oh, sorry.
No, that's good.
Okay.
okay. So the last one, it's the next line here, which is the transfers from utility funds. And I've asked this question numerous times on emails when we were asked to ask, put our questions ahead of time and write. I've asked just for an explanation. And we never got there yet. That's why we never got the explanation, but we're here now. And could you please provide an explanation, sort of a detailed explanation of what these amounts are associated with?
Talked about our last budget deliberations, with you, so I think question you had asked, Councilor Aaron. So the shared services, so that would be the percentage that would pay to shared salaries, portions to shared services, so like the utility fund contributes to postage meters, paper, things like that. Is paid out of the general operating, and that's basically paying the general operating from the utility for those items. So anything that's in the village center section, this would be all your staff. So your water operator staff, your director of operations and your water operator.
Am I correct in saying that those expenses are incurred in the general operating budget? And at a time during the year, those expenses are transferred to the utility fund, which then brings revenue into the general operating budget. Okay. So it's a transfer of where the expenses show up, so that those expenses show up in the utility budget for salary and paper and all the administrative costs. And that results, when you transfer the expense to somebody else, it creates revenue back to the general operating fund.
Okay, so this is money coming from the utility.
Yes.
Right, okay. So it totals 324,000 and change. So roughly, just say again, is this people?
This is people, this is supplies. So like
Hydro.
a portion of the fleet, so we have a truck that's dedicated.
Have you ever seen that? Where it's just in the most general sort of terms. These attributions of our fleet and of our public works staff, and it's even, I think it's the administration staff is linked in here.
The internet, it could be NV
All
Hydro, it could
What
be.
percentage is being attributed now to the utilities? We've never had that discussion. Or even had that presented to us, forget the discussion. That information is basically as vague as this single row.
That's always been presented as part of the budgets. It's the first time it's come up in terms of conversation by council. I'm sure that there's an explanation that can be provided, but I think it's wishful thinking that it'll be
Getting a bit in
provided
the
here
weeds, but we can
today.
certainly do that.
Yeah, it is getting into the weeds. Sorry, yes, Councilor Ward Russell.
Just for clarification, you've got some shared service of 95,000, and if is that correct?
Mhm.
So why, if this is only utility, why is there, I'm assuming a shared services everybody?
It's basically, so like the finance department salaries are a shared service. So when revenue comes in to go towards those salaries from the utility, it's a shared revenue because it's a shared expense.
But utility is water and wastewater, correct?
Mhm.
So why is an LSD paying that?
Not, it's basically an in and out. So they're actually contributing, so you have the expense of, say me, the treasurer. 25% of my salaries are paid for by the utility department. So the utility department sends money to the general operating to pay for their 25% of my time that attributes to their account.
So what is the 95,000?
It's basically paying for part of my salary, so it's taken away from the expense.
All
I
of,
would
not just her
initially-
salary.
It's just.
Yeah, but it's an
example.
example.
Salary is just an example of that type of expense, because her salary is, and I use that as an example, her salary is part of a shared service because it's administration. So it's paid, but that's coming back, and a portion of it is being attributed to the
So
shared.
initially that money that's coming from the utility lowers what your tax rate would have to pay for my salary. Does that make sense?
I'm trying to think it to word it.
I know, I'm
Should I
trying
speak?
to.
May I speak?
Yeah.
So basically, you've been expensed all the salaries because you're fares. So now we're taking a portion of that and we're bringing it in and putting a shared revenue in to offset it. So you've already been charged that 95,000. Now we're bringing in some revenue to offset it. So we've lowered it. Say you paid 195,000, we've lowered that now to 100 by transferring that revenue back in from the former utilities. So it's breaking down basically what we're covering for all the utilities, just for utilities versus what's shared.
I just find it looks odd. Yeah, it's sitting there, it looks like.
The LSDs
I
are
understand,
paying for
but-
something that they're not supposed
Well,
to.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
I don't
Sure.
know if that-
It's a fair question, yeah. Deputy Mayor?
Well, so linked to this, if we were to go to the utility expenses then. So if I, as part of these questions are first to allow me to understand, and perhaps others are also interested. So if we go to both under water and wastewater, there's a billing and collection series of rows, and they're all nil, 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 nil. And that's because if I understand, Jillian, our treasurer, Treasurer Hutchinson, that what we have there is the reason it's nil is because actually it appears on the general operating under, you and your team's salaries are in the general operating. We can see that, there's a series of lines for finance because here they're all nils.
Councilor Eric,
Those are fire.
I believe, like,
No.
it said as nil when we receive these forms from local government, because those costs, I think, can put it, or when it attributes to water costs and fire.
Here, if you allow me to stand up and show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
It's right in here, these rows,
yeah,
billing and collection, it's all nil, 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 nil.
but like, if you click the cell, it says nil, so like when it comes from local government, these forms come from local government, those are nil under water costs for fire.
Well, okay, but they're empty, meaning they're zeros. They're all zeros here. So in fact, it's not billed here. If I understand correctly, your salary that is used to do water and sewer collections and Krista's as well. We actually see those in the general operating expenditure column for your group.
Yep.
And then a portion of those, which we don't know which portion it is it 25%? Is it 33%? It's never actually written down anywhere for us. A portion of that is now charged to this fund via the revenue transfer, and somewhere here it's transferred out.
So like, it would, like I left in the comments section, it'll show where it went.
If you go to 2.4.2.1.9. I think she might have to highlight it there.
So to delete, extra accounting, I've essentially just put all our administrative costs in that other line and like it's in the months.
The general, admin general.
So that would be like all, basically I took the utility transfers, separated in, they meant other for water, and they meant other for water, wastewater.
So if you go to the top of that spreadsheet as well, Council.
70,000.
2.
Yes, that's right.
There's another administration in general. So
Right, so
there's
those
a couple
numbers,
different ones
those numbers then should add up
to the transfer.
to the transfer.
Correct.
And do they? Because
They won't, because some of the expenses in those lines are actually bank fees and net HST for those accounts. So it wouldn't be a true offset because there's expenses that are also in those lines.
So it totals 116 and 183, and the transfer was 95,000. So the difference would be the bank fees and the additional that
Right.
she's talking about.
Where it's actually services as opposed to,
Well, it's what that's where the law that we put in to eliminate extra accounting.
does anybody around the table feel it would be, it's useful and maybe mandatory that council members know what percentage of the fleet and the people that are all 100% accounted for in the general operating budget are transferred to the utility? I myself think this is key.
I just want to be mindful, the time of year. If you were asking for that prior to approving the budget, I think it's hopeless.
Yeah, it's probably hopelessness, but
But if you wanted, if you were looking for that information at some point, I think it would be useful and probably informational to have that. As I said, I'm being very mindful of the time here. Is that if we continue on the track that we're going, we're not going to get this done by 1 o'clock, or as Councillor Ward Russell says, she's got to leave at 1. Councillor Elderkin has to leave at 3. And then if the instruction to administration is to go back and clean this up to a balanced budget, then we need to come back. They're not going to work on the weekend. To me, it's not going to happen. So my preference would be to go back to what I said, is instruct them to come back with a plan to get everything back to a zero balance to the rates that where they were, and then come in on Monday, or it's probably going to be Tuesday now. Because if we don't allow them the time to do this, they're not going to work on it on the weekend. I certainly wouldn't recommend it, and I wouldn't ask them to do it. That if they take the day on Monday and come back to council with a plan on Tuesday, then we should be ready to go. But we can sit here and get into the weeds on every aspect of the budget, but we're not going to get anywhere. Yes,
I didn't take his question as getting into the weeds as much as confirming, justifying, I guess, what the utility budgets are actually paying. I think I brought this up at a previous, I seen a spreadsheet that we had said that I was paying, not I personally, but the villages were paying X amount of a percentage of somebody's salary. And that's where the concern is, exactly to know exactly what we are covering under the utility for part of the public works team.
right.
Basically, that is an important aspect to know, what the water is actually covering for the public works team.
Mhm.
And I think that's just what Councilor Arrow was asking for, is some clarification on it. I don't think he meant to get into the weeds, but maybe I'm wrong, but it's just clarification.
We are getting into the weeds right now, because we're getting into mixing the general operating and utility. Like I said, the idea is to provide them direction. I would like to see, and I'm offering this as a potential solution. If council wants not to do that and continue down the track that we're on, we'll adjourn the meeting with not accomplishing much. That's my only comment, is I'm here to provide some advice. The advice is if what I heard was that everybody wants to see a balanced budget, let them come back to that. Deputy Mayor Earl wants to see an explanation, that can be provided, but it doesn't need to be provided by Monday. If you feel that, if you feel that you can't approve the budget based on what you see, then vote against it. That's your prerogative as a councillor. Like, I'm trying to facilitate this conversation so that we get somewhere sometime today. Because we haven't gone through the utility budget at all. And I know people want to do that, and that's going to take some time. I think what I was proposing is a reasonable compromise to have them come back, because if we have to reduce, or if administration has to reduce the budget by $100,000, then they should come back with a recommendation on where that should come to.
Correct, but is there any chance that will affect the utility budget? That's basically the underlying question. Would there be any cutback on the general operating that's going to affect?
It could very well.
Right,
Right, but we're not gonna do that on the fly.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that, but I think it.
Yeah. So what's council's wishes? You want to continue doing this or? Yes,
I
I
think
mean-
we set a number and we send it back to council or send it back to administration.
and you've been quite clear. You want it reduced back to what the rates were last year. And so the instructions, if I understand correctly, but that will, it requires a majority. So if the majority of you are in favor of that, then that's the instructions we'll provide council. Then we can talk about the utility budget and the need for a blended rate. And then we can move on. Because like I said, if we finish here at 1 o'clock, like these folks, they've got some work to do. And quite a bit of work to do in a very short period of time. So that will like, no, there's no motion. Well, yeah, there's no motion, but generally direction. Are you okay with that?
I am okay with it. That's my one.
Deputy Mayor? Yeah. Are you okay? Councillor Elderkin?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's leave it at that. So that is the instruction is to come back with a balance to the previous ones. So on the issue of the utility budgets, let's have our treasurer take us through the utility budget so that we can see what's in it and provide some explanation to any questions.
All sale of water and all sale of wastewater disposal. Some of them equate to what the increases are in the water and sewer. Some of them I'm trying to. Some of the sewer was supporting the water in previous years, so I'm slowly bringing it back. We have connection fee charges underneath Riverside Albert and Hillsborough Utility only as currently we cannot add any water services in Elma. For interest, that interest amount is for all. Is an estimated amount of interest we will receive off delinquent utility users.
Mhm.
The water supply, that is money that comes from the fire department that goes into the utility to pay for the water supply that they use. Miscellaneous other, that's for the fees that we charge to real estate, not real estate agents, but to lawyers for encumbered certificates. The encumbered certificate is basically a certificate that states what amounts owing on that property. Under Alma Utility, there's $30,000 for unconditional transfers from other governments. That is monies from the Fundy National Park that contributes to the lagoons. So for Hillsborough Utility, I had a better idea for the surplus where there was not a lot of capital investment. That portion is there. Department. And for reserves, operating reserves, this is operating reserves that are being used in both utilities to help contribute to a lower tax rate.
Okay, let's stop there. Deputy Mayor.
So it's this last line, the transfer for operating reserves. I just do not understand why we would want to do this.
This to help pay for infrastructure and to help lower and keep the rates lower.
Right, so we're gonna get to the rates in a minute. What's happening here is that the Hillsborough rate proposal is for 0% change. It's the only utility that's doing this. And I don't know why we would want to do that. It seems very, very counterproductive to me to go to our utility users and say your rate increase this year is 0, when everything costs more money. We know that everything is costing more money, and there's lots of future work which will require money in Hillsborough. And yet what we're doing here is we're drawing from reserves so we can go to the community and say, don't worry, your rate's the same. It just seems like ill-advised on many levels. Politically is the most important.
So our charter maybe comment?
Ellsworth utility, that portion was the amount I was allowed to put in an operating reserve last year from the extra increase that Hillsborough Utility received to pay for their phase one. So this is me putting it back in to help contribute to their phase one of their water project. And for Riverside Albert, I put it in there to try to help lower the rate. Because this year there's, until some of their issues are resolved and the new bylaws put through, they needed, I put it in there to help lower their rate, but I can take it out if council revises me not to.
So the 46,000 is essentially what she wasn't allowed. That was put in an operational reserve because we collected the revenue for phase one last year and the previous year. So that was put into reserves. Now it can come back in to help pay for phase one. It's
But
additional.
it still goes, wait till we see the rate. The rate that's being proposed is zero. But by the way, this is linked to the question I had from our last meeting. So we see operating reserve fund. Are there 3 operating reserve funds for utilities, one for each utility? Right, so do we know what amounts are in these 2 operating reserves for utilities?
So that was part of the question, I believe, at one of our last budget deliberation meetings was you asked for a chart that outlines all the various accounts.
Yeah.
So that would be part of that.
Yeah, so
information.
so what I'm hearing though is this essentially is going to make them down to near zero for the Riverside Albert utility operating reserve fund will be going to, they'll be using everything here, majority, and the same with Hillsborough.
Council
So
Lyon.
we can use that 46,000 for phase one coming out.
Yes, that's why it's put in there to go towards phase one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Because it doesn't seem, it seems counterproductive to increase the rate for phase one where we've already increased the rate to attribute to it.
but we're still gonna need more money in that phase one to complete that project.
Yes, and work it out over the next 2 years.
That's just being out there to complete it. With using this 46,000. If you left that 46,000 in there, how much of the rate increase would it be? And
Oh, I took the operating reserve? I don't know what the rate increase would be, but if it's a short-term use, we would have to increase the rate for a couple of years and for a year or two, and then we would put it down. But it may not, depending on what we have to pay to phase two.
I'm just thinking going forward, it's better to put a little increase as we go rather than a big one. And stock this money up for phase one, because we're gonna need some serious exploration or water, in my opinion. Like the rate here that's forecast is 340. You know, if it went up a little bit, I'd be okay with that. Because I really think we need money in that account to go forward. Unless there's some kind of program
There's a lot.
that can win it, which I don't think there is, because it's a phase one, right? No, it's phase two.
Okay.
Just being proactive is what I'm trying to be.
Just hold on there. Okay, Deputy Mayor Earl.
So I tell you what I really don't understand. I don't get this, that the 46,000, what I'm hearing is this is really all associated with the phase one exploration. Okay, perfect. Let's just forget about that for a minute. On the expenditure side, not only do we know that the trucks and the fuel and the hydro, that everything and the people, everything costs more. But we also have an operator in charge who's on contract, who's costing considerable amount of money. And yet the rate that's proposed, the expenditure side, there's zero change. So how, if this money really is not coming in to keep the rate low because it's associated with phase one, which presumably you're going to spend money on, all these other expenses that went up and continue to go up to operate our water systems, that presumably we're seeing that in the other two utilities because they're going up. How come it's not driving Hillsborough up?
Because with Hillsborough, the cost for phase one keeps on going up, so we had moved it to over 2 years instead of 1 year. So if we put it all under 1 year, then their rate would increase.
Deputy Mayor Earl's question is, use the operator in charge. Because that's a significant cost. Presumably it's paid for by all three
Correct.
utilities. So why would the costs not have increased for the utility
Because we divided that water exploration up in these.
that the water, so you've reduced what you're saying is you've reduced the phase one water anticipated cost to balance out let me finish, to balance out with the increase in the cost of the operator in charge.
Did you follow? I don't follow.
Yeah, I do, in a way. So you're having reduced cost, you're showing reduced cost in one and increasing the other, so it balances out. Sorry. I believe it was in the 780 range, and it has increased. Okay, I was wrong.
That was last year.
That's what the unit we built. That's what they call equivalent users. It's not accurate, it'd be more units that we charge out. Like some would be more.
And there have been some increases over the past year, some additional construction, so that probably really does.
So if I may, so all we have in for the phase one is 486,000.
Oh, no, there's more.
How much? You-
It'd be well over 100,000. It'd be the drill of wells next year.
So that money's sitting there ready to go. That's my concern, I guess, with the 486,000 is to leave that money there because we're going to need that in the very short term.
Because
I need to happen.
Ian's not here, so I can't speak to it. But they're working out, I know the registrations that are required, I think only by environment to start the drilling. So he's working on that so they can do the drilling next year and then early next following year do the 72-hour pump test. So we've kind of divided the drilling from the pump test. So we'll do the drilling, pump test, and then in hopefully 2026, we can loan that phase. Hopefully all of us will, we can look at phase two.
Any other questions?
But does that mean then that in the utility expenditure, if we go to that tab, that under Hillsborough, then all of this phase, to link to Councillor Lamb's question there, does that mean that in those columns related to Hillsborough is the phase one exploration expenses for 2025 is in there?
Yeah. 0.4, 0.5, 0.3, 0.9.
That's 200,000.
So some of that would be still your other wells. But a good portion of it is. Because I mean, your source of supply your wells. That's fine.
Any other questions?
Well, let's go back.
Sorry.
A comment and a question. Estimating somewhere in 600 meters. Maybe more, but it was not.
But it's what all the budget forms are at.
And we know we're gonna go into phase two, we're looking for more money, and just to kind of, only what Councilor Lamb was saying. I as the councillor here, you sort of see a small increase this year, then all of a sudden we get 2 or 3 years out, we gotta really crank it.
I think we were trying, as administration, we were looking at it as general operating's going up. And if we don't have a concrete reason why this one should be going up, it's trying to alleviate some pain off the taxpayer utility user.
And I appreciate it, as a counselor, I do appreciate that. I'm just wondering if we did $10 per quarter, that's $40, that puts $24,000 a year in the coffers. Or exploration, or if something goes wrong.
It's, exploration's a hard one because we have, and I've gone back to community finance and they don't know a way around it. But exploration has to come out of like an operating reserve, or it has to be an expense in the budget because it's not considered a capital purchase or project until it passes that 72-hour pump test and is viable capital.
I believe what Councillor Jonah is suggesting is that if there is an increase, then it can be put into a capital reserve for phase 2.
Right. It can be put in capital, it just can't be put towards water
Right.
exploration.
So given the fact that the two councillors here representing the Foreign municipality of Hillsborough are suggesting a slight increase, and that should maybe be there. Yeah.
I think we need to take a place for future development,
Okay.
because we're gonna get the chairs money.
All right. Are we good on the revenue side right now? So maybe if our treasurer can take us through the expenditure side of the utilities.
So as for administration in general, other, this is half of what the administration and share costs from the utility, and there's also including your bank fees and your net HST. Your purification and treatment, this is the cost operating our water treatment plants. For source of supply, this is costs with our wells and Riverside Albert, there's a water reservoir. So basically the property tax insurance to operating. Transmission and distribution, this is for all water testing and for water line repairs if needed. Power and pumping other. This is all in power little so we get for operating our treatment plants and our distribution systems. For water purchase, this is only for Elma Utility as they purchase water from Fundy National Park. And the wastewater disposal administration other, this is the other portion. It is transfer, and this portion is lower because it doesn't attribute to that water operator. Wastewater collection system, this is for repairs within our collection, so wastewater lines. For wastewater lift station, these are a bit higher than last year. So I put in the cost to operate them and also to rebuild one pump per station. It's something we learned the hard way. And some utilities more than others is that when they're not pulled out yearly and one rebuild or replace, we're running into them not working and not funding properly and cost and that's the one to operate. Wastewater treatment and disposal. This is for the operations of our lagoons. The only reason that Riverside Albert is significantly lower than the other two is contributors that Riverside Albert has a natural lagoon, so it doesn't require irrigation or water. And wastewater other, it's only in Elma, that's for water lines that were, or not water lines, phone lines, we're still trying to distinguish where they belong to. Our interest on long-term debt is fairly self-explanatory, it would be all old and new debt. Interests and principals on debentures, as well as the portion from water system upgrades. In Alma and Riverside Albert Utility, there's short-term interest on capital projects, and that's to cover funds on upcoming projects and to cover interest until a time that they can go for a debenture. in Hillsborough, there's a transfer to the capital wastewater system that's to help contribute to any upgrades that are required to the lagoon. That was put in place years ago when Sharon was administrator.
Is that the $40,000 amount
Yeah,
to transfer?
yeah.
Because I thought it was for a period of time to end.
I continued it where the cost is increasing. I didn't feel it. We could still have room in the budget to keep it there. I thought it's in good interest to keep it there where the cost of blowers and the aeration for capital repairs are quite substantial, can be quite substantial for those. So I wanted to leave that in there.
So if we didn't spend it, it's being transferred into a capital account. So it's there for, yeah, it's there. It could be used for phase 2 if need be. It could be used for any capital expenditure. Okay. Are there any questions as it relates to the utilities? Yes, Councillor Alberton.
I'm just looking at the principal interest payments that Riverside Albert incurs here. So the short-term interest on capital project, is that the capital project we just finished, or is that the one the previous year?
Previous years, but there's still, I'm still paying on short-term loans
Right.
until I can get, there's a debenture sale in the spring. So that's my thing, is all our outstanding loans.
Right, so our GIC that we just cashed in was to go towards the water filtration system. So is that calculated in here? Will this change this any?
No, because they had gone, the tender had gone over and this, where the project had so severe a meeting done. We were just taking the funds for in capital to pay for that project, so it could be completed. If I remember correctly, it actually did fail.
Mhm.
Any other questions, Councillor Alberton? No, Deputy Mayor Earl?
Yeah, the first is a comment that, well, in future, what I think would be very useful is administration for the general operating. Administration prepared the budget proposal document that itemized last year's budget amount, this year's proposed budget amount, so you can see whether, there's an increase or a decrease. And it would annotate whether it was an increase or decrease that was being recommended, and the rationale for any increases. And that was a useful document for us all, for the general operating, but we didn't have, we still don't actually have that. You just had your narrative, which was good. But we don't have that intelligence provided here to know which ones are going up, how much they're going up from last year.
Would have been in the original work incentive.
Well, there's that original workbook there's nothing.
There was a utility.
I thought it was all blank.
Well, there were two documents. One was the general operating, just hold on. One was the general operating workbook. One was the utility. There were two separate documents that were sent to all councils. I recall seeing it. See,
It was brief. There's not a lot of detail in there because we were waiting for financials, audited financials that we didn't get, but there was some narrative.
Okay, this is the kind of thing that is very, well, I'll ask the last simple question here.
yep,
And I hate to go back to the general operating for a minute, but there's this link to here, because we see interest charges and things like that.
Mhm.
The general operating includes a revenue, which is interest on investments of 30,000. What revenue interest investment is that?
does that include GICs? No, okay, so just on the amount of money we have in
Just
general operating.
sitting there makes 30,000 a year.
Any other questions? So maybe we can go to the impact on the rates.
On the utility rates.
Yep. the proposed impacts. Want to go through them? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but. So the proposed impact on the rates for the Alma utility would be $1,510 combined for the year, if I understand correctly.
And last year was 1360, which is an 11% increase.
Right. And then for Hillsborough utility would be 840 proposed, which I understand you're going to look at changing that.
Yeah.
Based on the recommendation from the two councillors. And then the Riverside Albert utility was 1,067.52, or sorry, yeah. 1,067.52, which, will-
939.
right, so it's increased as a result of what they just had a water treatment plant upgrade, so that stands to reason that it's increased. Question? Yeah,
Well, does Alma and Hillsborough not break down their water and sewage the way that, obviously they don't, the way that Village of Riverside, former Village of Riverside Alpha does with regards to institutional, residential, commercial?
No, it's a back burner project. I have to go through each user and create a spreadsheet like was created for Riverside.
okay, anyone else?
So what is the proposal for then going to be for Hillsborough?
We don't know,
It was proposed by,
to increase,
proposed by Councillor Jonah that we increase it by $10 a quarter per unit.
so it would be 880 versus 840.
And that's 4.76% increase. And the others are going, the rest of us are going up more than 11.
Mhm.
It's still,
It seems like our administrator has some numbers in place to back up
Right,
the rate that they're
and,
asking, right?
but it's something doesn't add up.
well, your Alma is gonna go through phase 2 and a new water system. Riverside Albert just went through a water line replacement program and a water treatment plant upgrade.
Yeah.
The community of Hillsborough at some point will be going through phase 1 and phase 2, so those rates will likely increase in the future. Right,
But I would suggest that you start increasing them right away in this kind of increase. The writing's on the wall, guys, and you take all the extra money that you're putting and put it away because you know you got some big expenses coming. And we already know that you're running out of water in a way. There, it's important that, so you might as well start building your nest egg now, I think. That's my recommendation to.
What do you propose?
I would propose that you increase it at least 10%. Alma's going up 11. Riverside Albert's going up 13.7. At least 10% with, and you can tell your people it's going into the reserve that we know we're going to need, and it's not a far timeline horizon. This is coming for you guys.
yes, Councillor Jonah.
And I understand completely what you're saying. We've already taken a hit in 2023 to put money away to start this in 2024. We've already increased to start doing this work, and the work's never been done. So that money theoretically should be already sitting somewhere, someplace with the 2 increases that went through that we sold on to our residents that the water went up, but this is why it went up. We're going to be digging, we're going to be exploring, and none of that has happened in the last 2 years. So I understand completely what you're saying. We go back to the residents again and say, well, now, those 2 years didn't count, but we're going to hit another 10% on just the case. I don't know.
Just as a point of interest, Councillor Jonah, if we go through phase 1 and we have the money aside, doesn't mean we're gonna hit water.
Right.
So you're banking on the fact that you are going to find a viable source of water. If you do, then you're correct, Deputy Mayor. If you don't, then you have artificially increased the rates for no reason. Yes,
So a good note to have for in community building fund capital projects actually have between $400,000 to $500,000 already set aside for phase two. And their phase two, I believe, will be quite different compared to Alma. From what I understand, it's a well that's being drilled not very far from where our water treatment plant is. So essentially, we're not building a water treatment plant like we are in Alma. It would be more of piping that water to our well. So our phase two may cost a little different than Alma. So that was our consideration.
it's a good point. All right. Any other, and I'm sorry,
And this is an aside, but it raises the point that I made 6 months ago or so. You know, we're making all these efforts to collapse our general operating tax rates. This year, maybe we're not gonna make the next step, but certainly our budget proposals were to collapse into two, one for LSDs, one for the villages. We know that the current proposal, at least that was on the table for today, was for the villages. All of our expenses for public works, our basic, including snow plowing, our people, our trucks, it's all being collapsed into one pot and then divvied back out to the villages equally based on tax base ratio. Why we're not considering thinking about doing this for water, I don't know. You know, it's going to get more and more confusing when we have all sorts of extra supplies that are coming from the Alma Water Project, the blue pipes and things like that somebody else might want to use. All the kind of, you know, at some point, it will be in Fundy Albert's best interest to go towards what essentially is one utility, because that's how we report it to the province, is reported as one utility. It's only here that we divvy it up between the three.
so thank you very much for your comments, Deputy Mayor, but it's not gonna fly because I'm looking over there and I'm seeing the head going this way. I know the two, the two councilors who have constituents in the former village and myself. And as it stands right now, that would not be allowed because they're reported on separately and they're accounted for separately. So it's.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the blue pipe needs to be sold to you guys. You'll sell it to yourself
Or
10 cents a kilometer, right?
so it could be sold, period, and the funds go back into the project. So any other questions or comments as it relates to the water? I'm assuming that no one has any major concerns with what is being proposed there. So that could form part of the resolution or resolutions on Tuesday of next week. So, Deputy Mayor, one last one.
Well, I wish in future, if we could have the budget linked to a work plan, then we would really know we're approving this budget and it's associated with this 2025 work plan for the utilities. We don't really know what that is. We don't really know what's going to happen to the plan for phasing out the contract operator in charge. We don't know which pumps are going, the plan is to replace them. We don't really know. It's very nebulous. And in future, it would be useful and to our credit that the budget is linked to a work plan.
I'll let our chief.
Well, I've said it before, that would have been, if I came into this position with a work plan already in place, that would have been ideal, but it didn't happen and we are working on it. I mean, we just had our director of operations position was filled in September. So our plan is to get you something in January so that we can work on that and improve on that. But until this point, we just haven't been able to do it. Like I said, if I came in January and you said, here's what we've been up to for the last year, then that would have helped me immensely. But we are where we are and we make decisions with what we have.
And in fairness to administration, to come here with a work plan with a proposed budget and then told
$1 million.
$200,000 out of it, then you've changed their work plan. And so a lot of the work that went into it was for naught. And I think this is a more appropriate way. This is what their proposed budget was. Now we're telling them to go back And when the budget is approved, they'll be able to establish a work plan based on what you approved, and nothing more. Yes,
And we do have the asset management plan, right? So that's something that we've just got into place this year. We've got all three of them on the same asset management plan. That tells us the age of our infrastructure, where our priorities are, what's in red, which apparently is a lot of it. And that's what we're going to come back to council with. And agreed. I mean, it's really hard to pull numbers out of the air and say, well, it's going to have an impact on things without being able to show you exactly what that impact is. So our goal is to have that list and say, here's the projects. Here's what we can maybe get for funding. Here's where even if we get funding, we're going to have to pay a certain amount. So we're going to be a little bit, hopefully more proactive on all of this instead of constantly putting out fires and on the defense. So that is definitely our goal.
right.
Sorry, I do have another question. It's linked to the document that I'd forgotten that we have, but then I recalled that one of the reasons it was not particularly useful because it was so empty because we were waiting for the audit.
Mhm.
The audit has never come in for the utilities either, right? So like and then that's the same for general operating, but for general operating, we've assumed $100,000 surplus. What are we assuming here? Am I reading it correctly? We're assuming just zero? Is that what I see under revenue near the bottom? There, right there, goes.
It's not that I presume that there's zero, but there's been some capital purchases and those adjustments do make a change within the surplus. And I don't have confident numbers of what that will be. So I did not want to enter them into a budget that we are set with the local government.
Right, so the proposed utility budget here that we're getting close to having consensus agreement and approve.
Mhm.
Is it true that the surplus from second previous year is zeros? That's the assumption?
It appears that way.
Yeah. Well, except for the 63 number for Hillsborough.
This Hillsborough didn't have a whole lot. There wasn't really any capital purchase, so I think maybe one of $3,500. So it doesn't make a big capital doesn't make a big adjustment. In our supposed to be that you're like where in Alpha, where the 72-hour prompt has passed, everything that's been spent on that's a capital adjustment. So it could make a positive change in a sense of that we could lower the rate in the new year with those amounts, but without full adjustment amount. I don't feel comfortable sending this to local government.
See, so there's a potential that there are numbers that could go in here when we receive them that could have significant adjustments to our rates.
It won't adjust the rates. Once we set the rates, they're set.
Yeah, right.
Adjust them.
After the fact?
Yes, as we did for the first year for Hillsborough.
Yeah, we did in the second quarter, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, so like the first quarter would still go.
but we can't change the budget.
No.
No,
But-
yeah, that's what I'm getting at is
But if your
once
revenue
we,
is higher, you can't.
right. You'll end up having a surplus, but you can't change the numbers in terms of what you expect your expenses to be.
Right, because if you lower the rate, it's just like giving people a rebate. It becomes an expense as a rebate, isn't it?
Yeah, it was adjusted upward, I think, in the Hillsborough case, so it can be adjusted down.
Right, either way. So what's your confidence level that when we receive the audited financial statement, that the rates, the picture's not going to be worse?
I feel there's a good chance it should go down. My confidence level in the auditor is a little different.
It's tough to make that call in session and then be held accountable for it later. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
That's
hard
why
one to, it's a hard one to answer.
This is a bit the idiocy in it, or the ridiculousness of actually approving budgets without, like, it's probably illegal. Is it illegal approving a budget
You
without?
did it last year. You didn't have audited
This
financials
isn't
last
the
year.
recommendation of environment and local government.
Is this what they call the provisional budget?
Anyway, any other questions? Are we moving on to item number 5, are we in a position to approve the utility portion today? Or do you want it all done in one lump sum? Oh, right, yeah. Okay, correct. So never mind. Item number 5 is going to have to wait. Item number 6 on the agenda is a motion related to the 2024 year-end financials. So at the last special meeting on December 23rd, a series of year-end resolutions were presented, including one where anticipated surplus funds would be invested in capital reserves for projects that were not completed in 2024. The motion presented at that meeting was defeated because council felt it did not have sufficient information available to reach a decision. In a late message on December 24th, and thank you very much for that, Ms. Sabrin, the Chief Administrative Officer provided a thorough explanation of the situation, the anticipated surplus funds, the specific amounts that are being proposed to transfer, and the recommendation. A revised resolution was offered for council's consideration. So if someone would be so kind, in order to consider it, we need someone to move that resolution. We have it by email?
Oh, it's right there.
Or, oh, I'm sorry,
It's on
it
the
is
screen.
right there on the screen.
And it's also printed out.
Just to make sure that it's the same.
I'll read this one.
Yeah, just read the printed version.
Whereas the Fundy Albert General Operating Fund has a projected surplus of $625,273 due to uncompleted budgeted items, an additional 2022 surplus from the previous Village of Hillsborough, whereas the additional 2022 surplus of $198,502 from the Village of Hillsborough was invested into a cashable GIC. And whereas the treasurer has recommended that $150,000 of the shared surplus be transferred to the Fundy Albert Capital Fund, and that $172,345 of the shared surplus among the subunits of Alma, Riverside, and Hillsborough be invested into a cashable GIC. Whereas Fundy Albert will end with an estimated surplus of $104,426. Be it resolved that $150,000 be transferred to the Fundy Albert Capital Fund, $172,345 be transferred to a cashable GIC, and the remaining monies estimated at $104,426 be used to cover year-end costs and or contribute to the 2024 surplus for the 2026 Fundy Albert general budget.
So moved by by Deputy Mayor Arrow. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Coates. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, Councillor Ward Russell.
So with regards, so I do appreciate the detailed email that we did receive today. I still have a couple of questions with regards to the 8 or 9, because it's 8 recommendations. So is that a go, or will we still have a say on those recommendations?
I believe it was included in the email that there would be, council would decide on those recommendations. I believe you, yeah,
Yeah.
approved, yeah.
I think that's why we took the specifics out. Because if we have to do some adjustments, we didn't want to be tied to specific projects. That's my understanding.
Correct.
Answer your question, Councilor Ward Russell.
I guess just a side note here, I do see where it says the surplus of 104,426. It also does stand as where case of being not, this is the finance of the audit statements we won't receive until Q2.
That's the 2024 audit. That's referring to the 2024 audit.
Okay.
not to 2023, which we're currently waiting for.
So we're estimating that we're gonna be on target for next year.
That's the hope,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Fingers crossed. Any other questions, Councilor Russell? No? Councilor Alderkin, did you have, no? Any other questions or comments? If not, on the question, all in favor of the motion signify by stating aye. Opposed, if any. Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So that concludes the items. We do have a closed session matter.
There was a-
Oh,
The work safe, there was another motion on the agenda.
oh, was it?
My agenda.
Nope. I don't have it here.
Oh, I apologize then. It is included just in the motions for the year-end financial.
Year-end financial. So there is a motion for the WorkSafe New Brunswick Fund. So if someone would be so kind as to read that.
Sure.
Whereas for the first time in workforce safe, New Brunswick history, they are providing performance refund to eligible employees or employers
Mhm.
because of the surplus in their account fund,
Accident.
Accident fund.
in their accident fund, sorry. And whereas Fundy Albert has reserved a refund in the amount of $2,306. Fundy. The amount of $20,352.90. Be it resolved that the $20,352.92 be transferred to the
Correction, 90 cents, not 92.
90 cents.
Okay.
Be transferred to the operating reserve for the use of 2025.
So moved by Councillor Coates. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Alderkin. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add that this is something that we just received last week with our meeting on Monday, very late, and then Christmas, and we just couldn't get this to you by, I would have had to send it this morning, which is at 9 o'clock in the morning compared to a 10 o'clock meeting. So this is something that is, we did discuss very briefly. There was a refund. It's not very often that WorkSafe, it's that you pay by the amount of people, they have a fund. If they don't dole out all the money in the year, then they will offer a refund. So this is where the refunds are awarded back to us in the amount of $20,352.90. So we are asking that it gets put into the reserve fund so that we can use it in 2025. And with the going back to the original tax rates, I think this would definitely, we'd like to use this for our staff training and put it into that training budget that we've already seen some cuts out of. Because the more we can train our employees, then the less accidents that we will see. So that's what this is. And again, apologies on the last minute of it. It really is just a check that we're receiving. If we don't do anything with it, then it goes into the second year surplus, but we'd really like to have the opportunity to use it in 2025.
Any comments or questions?
One-time thing. I know our workplace is going through the same thing, and I think it's very appropriate to send it for training and things that better the employees in the working environment.
Councillor Russell?
Should that not be included in that motion
What?
for training purposes?
Does it need to be?
As long as we know that's where it's going. It doesn't.
Well, it's listed in our transfer from operating reserve. So essentially, we're putting in the operating reserve right now, but we're gonna use it.
You'll see it come back in his revenue and the budget for 2025 under that training.
But I don't think the training budget was cut by 20,000.
Was- I believe
We
it
cut
was
it by
15,
10, yeah.
10.
Yeah.
Any other? Yes, Deputy Mayor?
So you may have already told me this, but I didn't quite pick up on all this. When we get earlier today, we were at the revenues of the general operating budget. I was asking about that line called operating reserve fund, which that number was 68,573. And you were talking about that it was this, but this is actually 20. But I realized that
Yeah, so there'd be an additional 2,000. I'll add on to it, and that but it'll be an expense of 2,000 on the other side, because I believe there was an item. I want to say the trash box, or there was another safety item that Ian was looking at once we found out about the refund for safety purpose or for purpose.
Right, so the 68,573 is only partly the WorkSafe
Yeah.
refund.
Part of it's from our operating reserve, what we invested in last year.
Any other questions? Ready for the question? On the motion, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimously. That's it, I believe. So we do have a closed session under labor and employment that requires council's attention, so I'll accept a motion to move into closed session. Moved by Councillor Lamb, seconded by Councillor John. Any questions on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you.